Hey, hi everybody. I'm coming to you from our beautiful Eastern Cape at the moment. The men are down on the fishing trip and we're having a lot of fun. But I want to begin a new journey today with you in the book of Colossians, actually. Colossians is a great book written by the Apostle Paul under incredibly instructive circumstances. Now, the book of Colossians is one of Paul's writings. He never went to Colossae, apparently, but he's writing this book from prison. This man had a burden for people who knew the Lord and had been planted through people that he knew and he had trained, and he had a particular burden for the people in Colossae. They were suffering, not just physically, but they were suffering from poor theology. They were suffering from people who were taking the beautiful truths of the gospel and corrupting them to their own ends. There was some challenge about the supremacy of Christ. But the first half of the book is deeply theological. I can't wait to share some of these things with you. And the second part of the book is deeply practical, making your theology real in the light of the fact that we live in a real world and we're going to make this thing somehow. We're going to make these two things meet together. So welcome to the journey we're about to begin. Let me read to you just the first couple of verses from the book of Colossians, and then we'll stop for a moment. Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother. This is the first aspect. He could spend a lot of time talking about this. Paul, an apostle by the will of God. You see, nothing happens outside of the will of God. We have God's permissive will where the world will live on and do its thing, and God permits it to happen. He doesn't always like it, but because the world has made a choice to go its own way, God permits that to happen. There will, however, come a day when God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But Paul is recognizing his calling. He's talking about the fact that I'm not just a Christian, I'm a Christian by the will of God. That from the beginning of time, God set me aside to fulfill this particular purpose. And every one of us in the Christian faith is exactly the same. Every one of us has been called of God. Every one of us is called by the will of God. We all know that it is God's will that everybody should be saved. But is everybody saved? No, they're not. So the will of God is not totally being fulfilled when we look at the world around us. It doesn't mean He doesn't want it. It just means they don't want it. And so when we talk about the will of God for our own lives, we're recognizing our place in God's plan. God has a plan, and He wants to work that plan to your good and to His glory, according to the will of God. For me, this comes under the covering of the sovereignty of God, because God is a king. He's not some Mickey Mouse God who we just play games with. Some people will try that and find out that you don't want to mess with the sovereign God. A God who spoke creation into being, a God who will ultimately have His will, whatever takes place. Every one of us people, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, is a Christian and a follower by the will of God. It was God's plan, it was God's will that you should come to know Him. And then he goes on to talk about the fact that Timothy, our brother, he's writing to Timothy. Remember, we did a study in the book of Timothy the other day. It was a long series, so we did the same thing with that book as we do now. But he was talking about Timothy in the fondest of terms. You see, the gospel breaks down walls. The gospel breaks down barriers. The gospel breaks down gender and all those age issues that we tend to make big deal of. With God, there are none of those things. And with Paul, apparently, there were none of those things either. By the will of God, to my brother Timothy. Our brother is a connection of closest relation. That we're brothers in Christ, and that means that there is credibility in our relationships. That means there's mutual support in our relationships, because you are my brother. Now, this terminology could possibly go back even to the Garden of Eden. After Cain had killed Abel, God came and said to him, "Where is your brother?" And Cain very arrogantly said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And I know they were blood brothers, but even so, The depth of connection between us as Christians is as deep as that we are brothers together. So Paul is establishing for us at the very outset here the wonder of our Christian faith by the will of God, bringing unity to everybody who chooses to be a follower of Christ. We are brothers and we are sisters in Christ. That forms an incredibly strong bond. Can't break it because it's the will of God. Have a great day. Can't wait for tomorrow. See you soon. Bye.